In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Imagine the scene. A country that had known greatness, but was entering a time of crisis. The economy had stalled and then largely failed. They were trying to figure out their identity. They knew who they were, but how were we in our history in welcoming all these new people? Gathering that identity was important to them. Now, there were foreign powers that were real, present danger, and uncertainty ruled the land. And their best days seemed to be far behind them. And in that culture, in that country, there were two dominant political parties. One was viewed as the more conservative, representing the elite. That's a generalization, but largely fair. And the other was viewed as more progressive, generally representing the common people working for change. And as you might guess, these two groups never seemed to get along, nor did they agree. No one could find a way forward. They were deadlocked, and they blamed each other. Does that sound vaguely familiar to any of us today? That was Israel 2,000 years ago. And it was into that context that Jesus came and offered a message of hope to break through all of that, to find where God might be. The only thing these two parties, we call them Sadducees and Pharisees, the only thing these two parties could agree on was that Jesus was a problem. He was a threat to the established order, and he had to be discredited, silenced, and eventually he had to go. So they tried to find a way to trap him. That's what today's reading is about. This is the third of three trick questions that were designed to discredit him, so thankfully they could go back to the way things were back when they were normal before Jesus came onto the scene. Now, I think it would be a mistake to dismiss outright those two groups as being evil people. I don't think that's necessarily the case at all. The Sadducees and Pharisees, while they certainly had differences, their job was to interpret the Scriptures, try to find the best way to live, and give them the benefit of the doubt. They were decent people for the most part. But their questions and Jesus' answers to them are quite revealing. Now, the first thing they ask, and this was a couple weeks ago, the first thing they ask, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar, to the Romans? Those are the occupying foreign power. Jesus' opponents were anxious about the relationship to the state, how to be good citizens and how to be good people of faith. This touched on politics and the economy. The second question was a hypothetical, confusing, complicated one. A man married a woman, and then he died. So his brother married the widow, and then he died. And then multiple brothers kept marrying that same widow. No question was asked, why did the brothers keep dying, married to the same woman? However, it was their obligation to marry her because she could not support herself. That was the obvious, right thing to do. The question was, when she dies, whose wife will she be? Which brother will be married to her? They had questions about the future and what that might bring. And the third of these three trick questions in a row is from today's gospel reading. So it's best to see them all in context. It's a series of trying to track, to discredit Jesus. What, Jesus, is the greatest commandment? Now, we had a lot of choices, 613, and if he got the wrong one, then they knew. And remember, these guys were the interpreters of the law. This is a bunch of attorneys asking a legal question of someone who was not. Of all those commandments, thou shalt not, and all the rest, what is the most important? How can we make sense of our world and in these trying times? It's another way of saying, what are we supposed to do? Like those in any age, time of uncertainty, they focus their fear, their confusion on someone else. And it's those people, whoever those people might be at the time. Having a person or group to focus on, someone to blame, is always useful when things are complicated. It could be a villain, it could be a victim, it doesn't matter. At various times, Jesus was both. They're the ones responsible for the problems, not me. If we could just get rid of them and get our people in, then everything will start to get better. That's what the Sadducees and Pharisees thought. And the very questions they asked him that they tried to trick him with were the ones that confounded, that confused them. They could not answer. And all three were designed to get him in front of everyone. In his answer to each one, Jesus refused to enter the anxiety, the confusion of those who questioned him. And he responded with disarming answers. And probably like you, I sometimes want Jesus simply to give me the answer, to say what is clear rather than asking a question or answering a question with one more. His disarming answers and questions come out of his experience of freedom in God, and they are always that way. It's to disarm, to arrest, to make us stop short and pay attention to the life he calls us to. So the first, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar, to Rome? And he says, whose face is on the coin? Give to the Caesar what is Caesar's. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Give to the state what it's owed. We're always free to serve God or not. Are you free or not? The second question about the brothers and the widow, death means freedom and entrance into the fullness of God's presence. I, Jesus, may not know exactly what the future will bring, but it is far better than anything you could ever imagine. What else matters? And the third question from today, what is the most important commandment? Jesus gives an answer. In fact, he gives two. Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And love not as an emotion, but as a commitment to action, one that acts out this love in the world. All the other commandments are simply ways to love God and to love your neighbor. But the group there, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, which really represents all people from all time and places, they did not want responses that emphasized freedom. With questions of religion, many want definitive, concrete answers. Tell me the truth. Tell me the right thing. Tell me what to do. In the face of a time of uncertainty, in this case, massive uncertainty, we want facts. We want clarity. We want a plan to get us out of this mess. And that's what Jesus kept pushing them on. We want to know what to do rather than how to be. And that fundamentally is what Jesus is teaching here. Not what to do, but how to be, regardless of circumstances, to be in connection with God and our neighbor. Real truth does not mean certainty, it means freedom. Because there will always be another question, another crisis, one more thing to worry about. So Jesus teaches us not the specific what to do, but how to be all the time. And so presumably Jesus went on answering their questions one after another. He was patient that way. And then eventually he decided to end the debate. And he did it in love and in a slightly playful way. He turned the tables on them and offered them a gift rather than another trick. So Jesus asked them, using the same method that they were doing, what do you think of the Messiah? Whose son is he? Now they had no answer. And remember, these were the experts in the law, and they had no answer to that question about the law. Do you see what he did? He stepped into the minds of their opponents, stepped into the very anxiety and used it to help them to see, to understand. His questions broke through their narrow way of seeing. They had to get out of their heads and into their heart or soul. Not a trick to make them stop, but to stop short, to make them understand that God was there, to make them open to a new possibility. The scriptures say only silence remained. That is, no one was able to answer him a word, nor from that time on did anyone dare ask him any more questions. They shut up because they had nothing else to say to trick him. I suspect Jesus had great fun doing this, or at least enjoyed it a bit, but more importantly, there was deep compassion with what he did. Jesus did not hate his opponents. He did not even see them as enemies. He loved them where they were and how they understood it, and challenged them to break the focus, to stop the anxiety, and to allow them to make room for God. And he practiced exactly what he was preaching. He was loving his neighbor in an incarnate way, a tangible way that they could understand. The gospel shows that gift of love expressed in an unanswerable question that brought silence. That's the one that makes room for God. It was a riddle that no one could answer to get them to break through and see in a new way. Now, none of these three questions ultimately have any significance. They don't really matter, except that they each point to the essential human problem. So much for them of what they thought was important is actually a way of distracting ourselves from the one essential thing that Jesus says over and over: how to be in a loving relationship with God and our neighbor. And the way we love God is usually expressed by how we treat our neighbor. Now, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, perhaps like us, had trouble understanding what Jesus meant because of all the distractions in their world and their country at the time. They were consumed by all of them. I don't know about you, but I don't want to hear one more piece of bad news or one more thing on the horizon. And that's what they did, these Sadducees and Pharisees. They spent their energy worrying about each other, and the one free person they had ever met, they wanted to silence him. So he did the most loving thing he could do. He used their approach to stop their fear, to make silence for God to come in. Now, in that moment, a decisive one, they could have joined Jesus in his freedom, recognized the absurdity of their constant worry, their constant anxiety. All they had to do was accept that gift of silence rather than worrying about one more thing. And they likely would have wept, or they could have laughed at their folly, but we know that was not for them. But what about for us today here? In silence before God, we need not be afraid of the crisis of life or death in whatever form they may take. In silence, we learn that whatever confounds our logic, seems to be at odds with what we know to be true and believe to be the truth, whatever causes distractions, the noise to stop, that may be Jesus himself loving us in the same strange way he loved the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Sometimes we are moved, even unwillingly, beyond the concerns of everyday life to see past them, if just for a moment. And we come to this crisis where we can't take one more thing. And it's these times that cause us to think, to stop, to know who we really are and intend to be. And it is exactly in those times of crisis that the seed of opportunity arises. When our power, when our plans, when our money and motives and answers aren't enough, when we feel like we are at the end of our rope, it is then that we're most ready to encounter God. The question or crisis that makes us stop short and run out of answers may be Jesus giving us that precious gift of silent opportunity to make room to learn how to be with God and our neighbors.